There's another one you don't want to hear. Frankly, if you want.
1, 2, 3, set, go.
You are tuned in to the Power Chord Hour right here on 107.9 WRFA, as well as on the Power Chord Hour podcast. How you doing out there? I'm your host, Anthony Merchant, here with you. Very excited for this one. Today's guest, we have original Morphine drummer Jerome Deupree with us. They have, if you are a fan or if you're not and you are just discovering them, you are in luck. It's a good time for it because Like Swimming and their final album, The Night, are both reissued and remastered on vinyl with some expanded liner notes, photos, interviews, lots of good stuff. So we're going to get into all of that with Jerome. Jerome, how are you?
I'm good.
I've been looking forward to talking to you. You know, I think the one thing I will say, I mean, you know, these records are, you know, obviously Morphine, you know, not a new band by any means, but to be honest, I discovered Morphine earlier this year, and this is all still like, it's fresh and new to me. So I'm very excited to kind of talk to you as like somebody who, you know, I'm sure you've talked about these records for a very long time now, but for me, it's like, I like feel like I stumbled upon something brand new. So
no, it's no problem. That's one of the coolest things about it. I mean, you never go in to make a record thinking, oh, this will last forever or whatever. But, you know, we sort of did, and down to the genius of Mark Sandman, but, you know, people can come to this when they come to it, and there's nothing that sounds particularly dated about it. No. And that's something I'm real proud of, you know, and I turn people onto it all the time, and, you know, they're either going to like it or they don't, but there's no big deal if they don't.
Do you, and I mean, and I would say so, given that, you know, the interest is still there with these reissues and everything. But I mean, yeah, as time has went on, I mean, have you noticed that people are still discovering it? You know, that it's not just people who you still hear from now who, you know, or maybe they're back in the day. Are you hearing from people, I guess, like myself, who long after the fact are still like, oh my God, like I've stumbled upon you way later?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and Vapors has sort of helped in that sense of that. You know, going out there and playing live, even though I'm no longer doing it, it's helped spread the word a little bit. But no, people come up to me. I mean, I don't get it a lot, but I certainly know of the phenomenon, and that's great.
How did the, you know, going back with, you know, because I know, even though you don't really play with Vapors anymore, you guys are doing that for quite a while. How did that kind of come about? How did you kind of start playing the songs of Morphine? Because I mean that's still been going now since like 2009, I want to say, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it was the 10th anniversary. We had done orchestra Morphine, you know, after The Night was recorded and Mark passed the following summer in 2000, that record with a 9-piece band, and that group had played you know, various gigs since then, but was not super active. And then Dana got approached to do something for the 10th anniversary of Mark's passing in Palestrina. And he thought that rather than take the big band over, he'd, you know, like to do a trio. And some of the first people he asked weren't available. And we had been playing with Jeremy, not really doing any Morphine stuff, but the three of us had been playing as a unit. So he just kind of put it out to Jeremy, you know, would you like to try and play this stuff? And the answer was yes. And so, yeah, that summer was the first time we played. And we had a residency at a club in Cambridge for a while. And then we first went to South America. Boy, I can't remember exactly when, but we actually went as a 4-piece. Billy went with us for that.
Oh, nice.
But we did a lot of touring. I mean, I went to Russia twice with them, and, you know, a lot in Italy. So it was, we didn't do all that much in the States. We did a few gigs around the screening of the movie, the second one, Journey of Dreams. For a while, the director, you know, was showing it. He could only show it in limited function. before it got released. And so we would go and play either the same night or maybe the night after it was shown. So that was about the most we did in the States. But South America and Europe were both pretty popular.
You know, 'cause you're talking about like how it formed there. It almost sounds like it formed as, I don't know if it was a one-off, but I mean, basically, did you expect to do as much as you guys ended up doing? Because I mean, that really did snowball into a lot from there.
Yeah, no, we didn't, and I wish we'd had the name earlier, because the original name was, Members of Morphine with Jeremy Lyons, and I was thinking, I mean, I'm surprised I couldn't come up with Vapor, because that's exactly what I was thinking of, is some kind of fog or ghost or whatever, but we couldn't come up with it, and I think if we'd had the name, we might have had a little bit better luck. We tried to tour the States, and, I knew it wasn't going to be like it was, obviously, but we couldn't even, we'd go to San Francisco and couldn't even sell out 300 seats, and it was just it was really disheartening. We went out a couple of times and couldn't even break even on it. It was pretty disheartening. So yeah, we didn't really have any plans initially. It was only when the guy approached us about going to Argentina, that was like through my webpage, and I didn't think anything would come of it, but we started having the conversation, and lo and behold, we went down there. So, and that kicked off a whole bunch of stuff. But no, when we started it was sort of just a one-off, and didn't really have any plans to do a whole lot more. But yeah, it's it's been going ever since.
Did you guys hit anywhere, because again, you hit so many places. Did you guys end up hitting anywhere that Morphine didn't hit during your initial run? Did you go anywhere that the band didn't originally go?
I think they'd been to Brazil once. I think they'd been to Sao Paulo, but they'd never been to Argentina or Chile. So those very first gigs, we did 3 or 4 in Argentina and then went to Santiago. That first tour was pretty short, but I don't think they'd ever been any of those places. Everywhere else, I mean, Russia was definitely a new one too. In fact, there's a really interesting movie. I think you can find it on YouTube. It's called Bringing Morphine. And we got to see it the first time we went to Moscow. It's kind of a long story, but the people who had made it, it's a true story of these 3 guys who tried to bring Morphine to play in Moscow. But it was, the spring of '99, and right when they were ready to get it all done, it was July 3rd and Mark had gone. So, but it's this amazing movie about their trials and tribulations of trying to put on this show. And it's not very long. It's like 40 minutes maybe. But that was pretty fascinating. And no, we couldn't have been received better. I mean, I remember people saying, do you know how important your music is to the people of Russia? Yeah, to the Russian people. And I'm like, well, I guess I do now. It was pretty amazing. But a lot of the other places, I mean, Italy and Belgium and stuff like that, there might have been, locations that they hadn't been, but they were certainly in the general area of places they toured before.
That is neat. You guys got to hit some of those places, because yeah, I mean, if you're a fan for all those years and you never got to see Morphine, I mean, what a great to be able to get to see you guys later playing those songs. I'm sure they very much appreciated that.
It was really nice. There was one guy, I think he's the head of the Morphine fan club in Russia. He took a train from Siberia 72 hours nonstop.
Oh my God.
To come see us. And
that's dedication.
It blew our minds. Well, he is the fan, he's the head of the fan club. So it's like, and then it was like, gee, do you have to buy a ticket? No, I don't think you have to buy a ticket. And
yeah, you might have earned your ticket.
Right. Lisa was just showing me as a memory, one of the times we went down to Sao Paulo, we were playing outdoors and it was raining. So it was kind of iffy conditions, but these people showed up and stood around in the rain. But this one kid came up to us. We were hanging out. I think it was even before we played. We were sort of side stage, but, off the stage. And this kid came up with just kind of a gleam in his eye, and we said hello, and he lifted up his shirt, and he had a tattoo of, the major part of his chest with playing cards, and then in an Old West font, players win, winners play, have a lucky day, like on his chest. I mean, I was just like, okay, As much as I've been into bands, I've never wanted to do something like that. So
yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there. I love there are a lot of bands I love. I cannot say I have a whole piece dedicated on my chest to them.
It's pretty amazing. So yeah, it was definitely an adventure, and I'm really glad I did it for the time that I did. It just got my biggest problem and why I don't do it anymore is just the volume on stage. My ears, I've got really bad tinnitus, and I wear super heavy duty earplugs. And unfortunately what that means is everything just sounds horrible. And there's no real way to get it to sound better. And while I could go out and play shows, and I'm sure they were well received, after a while, it just got to be a drain on me. So that was the main reason why I stopped doing it. But it's fun to go back and sub. We've done a couple of gigs with Tom and me, which is nice because it's kind of like when Billy and I did those, we did a tour in the spring of '99. I guess we were still working on the night, but the bulk of it had already been recorded. And we had done one show in Chicago, New Year's 98 into 99, where I went as a special guest. And so they had this 2-week tour down to Florida and back, and Mark suggested that we do the same format. So we did, and that was really fun. So playing with Tom is sort of hearkening back to that. Obviously, I'd love to be playing with Billy too, and, miss him dearly, but it's the way things go.
Going back to the, I want to get back to the early days of Morphine. Starting out, how well did you know Mark and Dana prior to forming the band? I mean, did you know each other beforehand, or did you kind of meet through the band?
No, I knew Mark fairly well. I was a huge fan of True to Right, which was the band that he and Billy were in before that with David Champagne and Jim Fitting. They were kind of like a modern take on a blues band, but they were really good, and I was a big fan. So I knew Mark from that. I'd known Billy and Jim since the early '80s. Dana I'd known a little bit. He was in a band called Three Colors, who were on the same circuit as a band I was playing with in the early '80s. So I met him in passing, and I knew the name, but I can't say that I really knew him. But, when Mark called and just said, "Oh, I've got this new instrument and I've been playing with Dana, and, we want to get together and see how it sounds." So it wasn't like I was meeting those guys for the first time, but I didn't know Dana real well.
I something I'm always interested with bands, kind of with how well what it's going to sound like, or what your kind of idea of what a band sounds like. Maybe with Morphine, I mean, what a unique sound, it's so hard to start at the ground floor, for a foundation. I mean, early on in the band, how much of a vision would you say, or a sound in your guys' head do you think you had for Morphine before you really started playing? Or, I mean, would you say that Morphine found that Morphine sound just kind of morphed from playing together? Because, I mean, again, it's such a unique sound that it's not like, it's like three guys going in a room like, oh, we're just going to be a punk band, we're going to be this or that. I mean, how did that sound kind of morph,
Well, I think Mark came up with initially it was just a single string on a slide. He had a, really cheap electric guitar that he put one bass string on and was playing it with a slide. And that was the original instrument. And then he got together with Dana, and those two baritone, along with his voice, everything just seemed to work. And so they called me, and I remember I knew both from True to Right and from the Hypnosonics, another band of Mark's that I had played with previous, that he wasn't really a fan of cymbals. So that sort of set the tone. I remember I can't remember exactly what I played, but I remember only having a floor tom and then bass drum and snare and, maybe a hi-hat. I don't know if I had. Eventually I had a couple of small cymbals at first, but in the rehearsal I might have deliberately, gotten away from them altogether, except for the hi-hat, which I, only used with my foot. So that was somewhat deliberate, just in that I knew Mark wasn't going to want a bunch of high-end, So it was fairly organic. And it was obvious that there was something there. I mean, we met at a rehearsal space that I had in Everett at the time, and we played, and Mark had a couple of tunes and Dana had one little sketch, and then, maybe we jammed a little bit. But I remember we took a break and we went out to get something to eat, and Mark, I remember him saying Morphine, like he already had the name. So that was, it was there right from the start. But so maybe he had thought about it, a fair amount, or was, thinking about it as it went. But for me, it was pretty organic, just the way it came together. But yeah, it was there was clearly a vibe, and I remember the earliest shows at the Middle East. It was clearly the band was, we had a good crowd, and it was well received. So it just seemed like things were going to go right off the bat.
Again, like with the uniqueness of the sound of Morphine, those early, actually not even early shows. I mean, the entire time you guys played, like, I'm trying to think of who you would play with. And again, like getting into genres and stuff like that, I assume you played a lot of like mixed bills where, again, I mean, not a lot of bands to play with that sound like you. I mean, like you were talking about with the reception there. I mean, did audiences generally, when you were playing for, say, an other band's kind of audience, like, could you win them over pretty easy, or were there times where like you did have to kind of win over audiences and stuff? Because again,
it's a mixed bag. I remember some gigs in New York that weren't, quite as well received as up here. You have to remember, I didn't do the majority of the touring. We did a handful of gigs because Mark was always busy with a bunch of other stuff, and Morphine wasn't his sole focus right off the bat. So we went to New York a couple of times, and we played around Boston, but I didn't do the majority of the U.S. touring and stuff that they did after, when Cure came out on Ryko and things really took off for them. So I can't speak to that, but in terms of what I did, it was a mix. I can remember, like I said, sometimes New York audiences are just too cool, and I think we came up against that once or twice. But the other thing we did right before I decided to leave was we did a short tour of California, Los Angeles, and then up to San Francisco, and then back down, and played in San Jose and Santa Cruz, and some of those gigs were really good and pretty well received, if not super well attended. I mean, we played a big club in Santa Cruz, and there weren't a whole lot of people there, but they were into it. And the gig in San Francisco was really good. All the Tower people had come out because, we had released Good on our own on Russ Gershon's Accurate Distortion label, and it had really gotten a buzz. So they brought a bunch of people down from Sacramento for that. So I remember that as being a really special night.
Oh, nice. Actually, like those songs that made it on Good, I mean, when you kind of look at the early stuff that the band was writing, like were the early Morphine songs, like the batch of songs you guys wrote, did those kind of make it on Good, or were the songs on Good maybe written a little after maybe the stuff that the band first wrote when you formed?
No, I think that was pretty much the first batch. I mean, they had done, I think Claire had been done by True to Right in some form. Mark was always, he'd write a song and then he'd play it in a variety of his he always had 4 or 5 bands at least, and he would play it in multiple situations and see which one it kind of fit the best. And so I think there were some that I had heard before, but I can't really remember. But no, that was pretty much it, that first run. And then we did some covers early on. We did a couple of I'm forgetting his name, Mose Allison. We did a couple of his songs early on to sort of fill things out. But no, Mark was, writing all those songs. They were, they weren't necessarily right away, but they were pretty soon after.
For you, I was this was like it popped in my head not long before we got on the phone, but, thinking of you as the drummer and kind of locking in with a 2-string bass and, the way Mark's playing everything, is it is your approach, and I mean, we were talking about cymbals, different things like that earlier, but I mean, that approach, is it different, with a rhythm section with something like that, versus in a conventional band, like locking in with, say, a 4-string bass or something like that? I mean, is it totally different, or is it pretty similar to how you'd play with most other bass players in a band? For you as the drummer with that, I mean, how different was that playing with a 2-string bass, if at all?
It was pretty different. I mean, the whole thing was really liquid. You could, like a lot of times when there was a new song, we would only play it enough in rehearsal that we could get through it without any like major train wrecks. But the arrangement and everything would still be sort of up for grabs. So when we did it live, Mark might change the order of vocals. Everything was really kind of nebulous. And that was one of the fun things about it for me, was that it could, we could improvise on an entire band level, in the moment, depending on just, Mark would have some cues, or it was just like, oh, this is happening now, because it did, and we were able to not freak out about it. I think in some ways, Mark, his feel was generally really behind the beat, and I tend to be way on top. And rather than train wreck the way it might be with a more rhythmic bass player, the fact that it was slide kind of maybe let the whole thing work. I know in some ways, playing with Jeremy, it's a different thing, because even though he's playing the same instrument, his feel is very different. And in some ways I have to do the opposite. I have to sort of lay back more. Whereas, with Mark, it was sort of like I would goose him or pull him along, I was sort of like, this is where it is. I remember asking a friend early on if I was playing too much. And he said, well, someone's got to do something, So it was, a lot of times on stage, and it, not so much in the early recording of the things that are good, but certainly on Cure for Pain, a lot of those performances are very much like a live show. I mean, I had an approach to songs, but I didn't have a definite part per se. And it was always up to interpretation, and I could go with things in the spur of the moment as long as they weren't, too wackadoodle. But, some of the things that happened on Cure that are really special are simply because it was sort of like a live gig, and we were firing on all cylinders at that point, even though I'd already, technically left. We had been playing a lot, and we didn't spend a lot of time doing insane amount of takes. So it was very much a live record in that sense. So I really enjoyed it, because I could sort of bring, I enjoy a really wide range of music, and Morphine was sort of the closest thing I'd found that could do all of it under the same umbrella.
For you, because you're on the first 2 records, and you came back for the night. I mean, I feel like you were still within the band on and off, like for pretty much the entire existence. It seems like, So like I was wondering that, like, when you left the first time, like did you have any inkling you would be, but like was it one of those things where you kind of went but you kind of thought, well, I might still be back in the fold? Or when you left the first time, did you think that was it? You didn't really plan on, kind of coming back?
No,
later?
I left because of medical reasons. I had sort of an arthritis thing come up, and my hands got, I was in a lot of pain, and playing just got progressively worse and worse. And I finally just said, I'm going to stop playing until I can figure this out. And even though Mark never quite understood that, I think the idea was that if I could get well again, the gig was still mine. Obviously, Billy filled in the interim, and that led to a lot of confusion, when the records got released and who played on what and yada, yada, yada. But the first time was definitely like, no, if I can make it back, I will. But once I came back, then that was when things started to deteriorate between me and Mark. So it was all within the space of a couple of years. I stopped playing in 91, January. We literally did a New Year's Day show, and I just said, that's it. I've got to figure this out. And I didn't play again until the fall. Well, actually, I got treatment in the fall. I started playing in the spring of 92, and then we put out Good, and then, the West Coast tour and stuff. But by the end of 92, I was out. So it was pretty quick succession there. And then I really wasn't involved. I mean, I was always friendly with Dana and Billy, so I knew what was going on, but I wasn't really a part of things in that sense. That only happened relatively later, like in the summer of 99, that I sort of came back, and then they floated the whole idea of doing the night with both of us. So that was, and I'm glad that happened because, Mark's and mine relationship was one of the most intense I've had, outside of family members or my wife, so it's, if he had died without any reconciliation, it would have really been tough. So I'm really glad we got to, even though it was still a little awkward, we were able to get together and work together. And I think the Night's a really amazing record. I mean, to me, it's very different from all the others. And I didn't necessarily hear it at the time because the songs were, a lot of them were really slow. And once we had an arrangement, we would play them for a long period of time, like just keep doing the arrangement around and around. And then Mark would go in later and sort of pick which one he thought was the best. So I didn't really hear the finished album until it came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was really kind of vague as to what this was going to turn into. Certain songs, I mean, I overdubbed on Take Me With You and Souvenir, so I knew a little bit more about what those were about. But a lot of things were kind of jammy. I mean, I always tell the story of, it was one of the first days that I went over there, and Mark's loft was always kind of cold. So I was trying to warm up, and I just started playing this beat, and Billy joined in, and we were just sort of jamming, but we didn't have headphones on. We weren't recording per se. And Mark suddenly came, running out and put on his headphones and picked up his bass and, told the guy to start recording and started playing, and I couldn't even hear him. So we just hung on that groove until he felt like he had what he wanted, and that turned out to be So Many Ways.
Oh, wow.
But we had that drum track. I remember even like as the recording went on, we had the drum track, and he kind of had an idea, but he wasn't really sure how he was going to use it. And I can't remember if what he was playing the first time was even related to So Many Ways. I want to say it was, but I can't remember. I just remember it being a pretty odd way to record a drum track.
How those recording sessions for the night, I mean, was it pretty similar to recording the first two Morphine records, or or was it drastically, would you say the whole process was drastically different than the first two?
I think it was pretty different, being that it was at Mark's, and the scheduling, it wasn't so formal. I mean, most of the stuff for Good was done piecemeal. We'd go into the studio and record a couple of songs. And we did that on a bunch of different occasions. Cure for Pain, for me, was 2.5 or 3 days cutting basic tracks, with Mark. I mean, Dana was playing too, but some of his stuff might have been overdubbed after the fact. But I think the bass and drums were done together. But that was, one session concentrated. The night was spread over months, and yeah, we would go in every day, but it was always questionable as to how much might get done in any particular, whether we were working on a song we'd already done or whether it was starting new or whatever. It was much vaguer in that sense and a lot longer. Obviously they'd scrap an entire record at that point that they'd already made. So it was, Mark was doing it at home, and he was under a certain amount of pressure from DreamWorks and, blah, blah, blah. So it was a very different session. It's just a lot longer.
When you did come back in the fold for the night, I mean, were they already working on it, or did you come in right at the beginning of writing that? Or when
they had been trying to record for a while, and I knew through talking to Billy that they were having trouble, and Mark was, blaming Billy for some of it, and I knew good and well it wasn't his fault. Drummers in that sense, a lot of times on recordings they get replaced, or it's the drummer's fault, quote unquote. That was partly why I insisted on doing it with him. They asked me to come back and play, and there was one day when Mark said, "Why don't you just come in?" And we tried to do stuff, just the two of us, but it just felt bad to me on any number of levels. So I just kind of said, "No, if you want me to do this, Billy and I are going to play, and let's get Dana in here, and let's play it as a band." And so that's what we ended up doing. I never really felt like I was back in the band. I mean, there was talk of doing more touring in the summer with the same format as, special guest, but there'd been nothing floated about, me being back and Morphine being a 2-drummer band now. We did the recording for the night, and we did that one short little tour and the gig in Chicago. But I remember just hearing that there was talk of going out with Soul Coughing, later in the summer. That, of course, all went away on July 3rd. So I've got to be, clear about that. It was just, I did the recording, and we did play some live shows, but it wasn't like I was fully back in the band. It was still a work in progress.
How much of the material did pretty much everything you guys wrote for the night, you think, make it on there? Or was there a lot of stuff that didn't make it onto the record that was written?
Well, I don't know. Like I said, they had shelved an entire recording that I've never heard. I think maybe some of those songs were similar, but Mark always had, like I said, he was always kind of putting lyrics with different music, and he was always experimenting with different things to see what would work. So there might have been a certain amount of rearrangement in terms of what they had tried before, but I don't know. I don't think he'd come up with an entirely new batch of tunes, but like I say, I don't know what they tried to record with Paul that ended up not going anywhere. So I can't really speak to that. I was, like I said, I didn't know any of the tunes. before we started doing them. It was very different than Good or Cure for Pain, where I'd been playing those songs live before we ever recorded them. This was sort of figuring it all out as we went along. And, like I said, the whole process wasn't necessarily vague, but it was just different. It was more experimental, maybe, in a way. Like I said, Mark had ideas, but he didn't necessarily have fully arranged songs, and here's your part. It was just sort of make it up as we go along and see what works. I remember there was one track that we had similar to So Many Ways. It was, I think it sort of came out of a jam, and there was either an odd meter in it or there was a part where the time kind of got turned around somehow. But I remember thinking it was really cool, and for the life of me, I don't know what happened to that track. I remember thinking like, oh, this will be fun to work on, and it didn't really have a title, it was just this musical thing, but I thought it was really cool, and I've never tried to go back through the archives and find it. And needless to say, it never got used. So that's the only one that I can think of that, was kind of like potentially something there that I heard that nobody else did or whatever. Maybe Mark couldn't come up with a song for it. I don't know. Maybe it was too fusiony for him or something, but I remember liking it at the time. So
it's floating out there somewhere.
Yeah, and there was the other one, Pretty Face, I remember, that came out on the Sandbox. I know I played that, but I don't remember that as being one of the tunes. Like I said, it was kind of vague for me. Not vague, but just it was a discovery process, let's say, versus, oh yeah, here are these songs and here's what we're going to record. It was more like, let's try to make this stuff happen.
Kind of a little bit going off that with songs. I can't take credit for it. I had a listener with a question that somewhat kind of goes off that. I'll give credit to Richard Datson here. But is there a song for you that brings back your favorite memory of kind of writing and recording with the band? And maybe that's hard, but I mean, going through, is there any that kind of stick out? Maybe it was a good process. Maybe just the song itself like conjures up good memories. Is there any that stick out to you? Basically the catalog.
From the night of the whole thing?
The whole thing, basically, he said. The whole catalog.
Well, I always point to Cure for Pain. Oh, no, sorry, not Cure for Pain. Buena. I don't play on the title track on that record, but Buena we did. And as I remember it, we went into the fort to set up and get sounds, and then we were going to officially be recording the next day. And once we had everything up and running, Paul Coldry suggested that we play something just to see, how it all sounded together. And my memory is that we kicked off Buena, and I just remember, like, yes, I knew it was being recorded, but I didn't really have that sense of, like, this is for an album or anything else. And so I was just sort of in the zone, much like I would be in a live performance. And there are things that happen in that performance that, I'd never done before. And I remember we got done and Paul kind of went, well, I think you got that one, recognizing that it was a really good performance. And I'm pretty sure we did play it again, but to my memory, that's the version that wound up on the record. Paul was probably the only person who could say for sure, and I've asked him, and he's never said, no, you're full of it. So, I go by that story just because that's how I remember it. But that's always the one I point to, just because it's such it's a really iconic performance for me. And when we started doing it with Vapors, it became that whole question, because there are things in there that, unlike a Neil Peart, I didn't play the exact same part every night, but when you're doing it live, that there are people in the audience that want to hear all that stuff. And so it was always sort of a dilemma. Do I try and recreate, these really special moments that just happened on their own, or do I just keep playing the song in the same mode? Like I say, I had an approach and a general arrangement, but it was never like every bass drum hit and every snare, every drum fill was exactly the same. So yeah, that would be my track. I mean, in terms of the night, probably the title track, or So Many Ways, just because it was so, it was so different. But yeah, I think Buena is really the best, representation of a lucky break, and just, like I say, it was more playing live, but
It's that whole first take thing. It's the whole, like, your first take's your best take a lot of times.
Well, yeah, no, there's definitely that. And, like I say, I was just sort of in the zone. I was just thinking about playing the music. I wasn't thinking about, did I do that right? Or, am I speeding up or anything like that? It was just letting it rip. And, I got lucky. And I'm really proud of it. It's probably something I didn't realize till a lot later. Like, people sort of pointed it out to me, like, oh yeah, there's this hi-hat thing, man. This is my favorite, and I was kind of like, I don't know what it was. I didn't do it on purpose until that moment, So.
I think it worked. I would say it worked. I think what you did,
yeah.
Whether you realized it in the moment or not, I'd say that, it came out quite well.
Like I say, the session at the time for Cure was somewhat distraught, just in that I'd already, left the band, and I was coming back to sort of do Mark a favor a little bit begrudgingly. And, I'm really glad I did in hindsight, but at the time it was a little rough. I just sort of remember having a, attitude about, let's just get this done, so maybe that aggro kind of made the songs spark a little more or something. But like I say, I didn't belabor, we didn't do multiple takes of stuff, and I think I was done in 2.5 or maybe 3 days with all the basics. They spent some time working on it after that, but my stuff was done, early on and very quickly. But I think that lends itself, I think that's part of why the record sounds the way it does.
As we start to close this out, again, talking about, you got quite the legacy here. I mean, with the two, records being reissued and everything, what would you say if you had to credit something? Maybe it's hard being on the inside of everything, but the legacy of Morphine, why we're still talking about the band, why these records are being reissued and everything. I mean, for you, is there anything you could pinpoint or credit as to why this band has lasted as long as it has?
I think it's just the uniqueness of the sound. I mean, and you don't even really hear, there are people that have tried to sort of get a similar sound, but it's not like it had a huge influence in that sense. And so it's really still very much its own thing. And like I say, there's a timelessness to it. The sounds aren't dated, technologically wise. It's not like gated reverb or any of that kind of stuff that decades later can just sort of be like a bad joke, or really date the music to the time it was recorded. This doesn't really have any of that. And so I think, like you say, people discover it when they discover it. And it's, it wasn't planned. It was just simply, Mark's coming up with that sound and sticking to it, kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's, it's one of the funnest things about telling people, like, I tell people, go to YouTube, do a search on Morphine. If you can find Buena, great. But if not, anything you find is going to have that sound, and you like it, great. If you don't, no problem. And then that's kind of genius. It's not like, oh, here's this really great grunge band I was in back in the 90s,
Sounds very much like its era. You sound very much like 1993.
Right. And, Morphine was sort of, I've heard it said, it was kind of an interesting take, that Morphine appealed to a lot of different people because it kind of had little bits of everything. It rocked hard enough to be a rock band. There were vocals, so it was pop, songs in that sense. The saxophone and to a certain extent the drums were jazzy in a way. So it kind of like it combined little bits of a lot of different things that different people could come into it liking it for different reasons. And I think that makes a certain amount of sense to me. But it's also cohesive, it is its own thing. I remember somebody it wasn't a gig that I was on, but he just said he remembers going to see him and just the vibe was so unbelievably strong. It was just like, it didn't sound like anything else. And yet it was not like a bunch of, it was put together. It was played on purpose kind of thing. It wasn't like just some random thing. And, that just really caught people.
No, I gotta give you credit. I mean, that when I was telling people you were going to be on the show, I had a lot of people. I never realized how many people I knew were such big Morphine fans. But to what you're saying, I have to say, I can't put them all like they're very different people from very different musically, like people who would never connect in anything. Like so many people told me, oh, I saw Morphine back in the day who like one guy's a Deadhead. The other guy like was a punk, like all these different ones where like you're saying, it's not like it was just one kind of, it's not just like the record store snob. Like those are just the people who know you guys. Like everyone I talk to, all different walks of life, like all love your band. And yeah, I can't, they don't like a lot of the same things. You would be like the one common thing they could all agree on.
Right. No. And that's, like I say, that's just the luck of the draw. I mean, I don't think any of us, Mark included, had any idea of something like that happening. It was just, he was just following his muse and, where his music took him. And, we were just along with that. But, you don't sit there. I'm sure Miles didn't, when he went in to do Kind of Blue, he wasn't thinking like, oh, yeah, 50 years from now, people are still going to be digging this record. He couldn't have. I think he just was doing what he wanted to do and, he hit one. And granted, he did it a lot of different times, but, it's still, I don't think you can go in planning to have something like that be the case. You just can't, any famous, painter, filmmaker, anything. I don't think you can know when you're making something. You might know that it's good, but I don't think you can know its timelessness. I don't think that can be, created on purpose, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, I got to agree with you there. I think if you were all sitting in the studio thinking that we'd all be talking about this decades later, I don't think we would be talking about it decades later, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. No. And you think of all the records that were designed to be hits and were worked on extensively and went nowhere, and then other things, that were just garage band. I don't know how far back your listening goes, but, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a masterpiece. And I've heard, I don't know if this is true, I've heard that whole thing is one microphone.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, the whole song is one mic. I don't know if it's true. Dave Marsh wrote a book about the song that was really great. Went back to all the history of, Richard Berry and the Seattle and all this stuff. But he spent obviously a long time on the Kingsmen and the supposed dirty lyrics and everything else. And for me, that's just an absolute classic rock and roll recording, and I was very young, but it was a current song, and I've just always loved it. But I'm sure those guys had no idea. They were just lucky to be able to record it,
Yeah, well, it's all being recorded on one mic, same thing. Yeah, I don't think they're like, oh, yeah, this will be mentioned in, we'll be still talking about this song decades and decades from now. No,
exactly. So, and there are a bunch of those. Blue Tears, Summertime Blues is another one. It's just one of the greatest covers. And it's partly because there's the opening riff, they can only play at one tempo, so it leads to these radical tempo changes as the song goes on. Because every time they come back to it, they have to slow it way down. It's just classic. It's so Californian, But I mean, there are a ton of them out there. But I'm just glad to be a part of it.
We have these 2 morphine reissues. Anything else? I mean, are you working on anything else at the moment? Anything else going on in the world of Jerome Deupree?
Oh God, for me, yeah, I'm busy like crazy. I've got a band called Listen to This, which is playing the electric music of Miles Davis,
Oh, nice.
basically in a silent way through his retirement in '73 or '4, whenever it was. We're not doing anything later than that, so it's primarily in a silent way in Bitches Brew, but we have touched on some of the stuff after that. But that's really fun. And, we've been playing about once a month, maybe not quite, and getting good response around Boston. I don't think we'll ever record because there's kind of no point, but I would like to keep playing live and, maybe get out and see other parts of the world. It's been really well received, kind of surprisingly to me, but I'll take it. So that's one thing. And then I'm playing with David Champagne from Treat Her Right. We've done a couple of gigs, or we're doing a second gig with Jimmy Fitting, actually doing the Treat Her Right material, and that's always fun. I've got an improv band with Dana Colley and a guitar player named Adam Steinberg called Effects of the Sun, and you can find that on Bandcamp. And it's pure improv. Adam just recorded our first gig and kind of edited it and made it into an album. But, the songs, it's not like we're going to ever play those songs again. So it's fun. It's improv, but it's not out, jazz. As a friend of mine likes to call it, Pet Shop on Fire. I do plenty of that in other settings, but yeah, it's I'm busy. There's a lot of different things going on, and I'm really happy with it. There's a band with Kami Lyle and Joey Spampanato for those of your listeners who are NRBQ fans.
Oh, nice.
It's been I keep pinching myself that I'm getting to play with this guy. It's, beyond being a fan, he's just one of the most natural musicians and just a sweetheart of a person. And it's a real honor to get to play with him. And so I'm looking to do more of that. And what am I missing? I guess there is a certain amount of free improv, mostly with Joe Morris, the guitar player, bassist. And a lot of that happens either in New Haven or Hartford, Connecticut, but there are a certain amount of gigs that happen around here. So yeah, I'm busy.
You're staying. I will be honest. I have a lot of projects to go check out. I got a lot of stuff I've not checked out from you yet. I got to go check out after this.
You can find more info on my fan page on Facebook. There's a Jerome Deupree fan page on Facebook. My regular page got hacked a little over a week ago, and so that's dead in the water. I can't get to it, and unfortunately, it's being used to try and defraud people out of money.
Oh, geez.
But it's a real drag, so I may no longer be on Facebook other than my fan page. But you should get all the gig info and stuff like that from there.
All right, so we'll send people there. If you're listening to the radio show, we will play some Morphine now. If you're listening to the podcast, you got to go get those reissues and listen to some Morphine. But Jerome, as we close this out, we miss anything else to let the people know before we go?
Just that I miss Billy Conway very, very much. And I'm glad I got to know him and play with him as much as I did. And I think about him every day. I'm looking at his picture right now. And, it's that's just a special one right now. So just got to give a shout out to the man.
Well, Jerome, this is a total honor. Again, as somebody who is just finding all this stuff, which if you're listening to this and you also were a fool who not discovered Morphine yet, do not sleep on this. But again, if you're listening to the radio show, we'll play some Morphine now. If you're listening to the podcast, go grab some Morphine. But I'm Anthony Merchant talking to Jerome Deupree of Morphine right here on the Power Chord Hour.